Some things stop belonging to you long before anyone bothers to say so. The paper had been taped unevenly to the side of the mailbox, a corner curling outward, as if trying to look away. I didn't need to read it twice. I'd seen Marla's handwriting enough times on grocery lists, clipped to the fridge on thank you cards, signed only with her name, never ours. The letters were tall, almost performative, like someone trying to appear graceful while bracing for applause. Ruth, the family needs some space to regroup. Please don't come this weekend. No dear. No explanation. No signature. Just that one sentence written in a pen that had begun to skip. I folded it once, then again. There wasn't a trash bin nearby, and I didn't feel like walking back inside. I slid it into the pocket of my apron, the one with a faint ring of brown on the lower left side from a coffee spill I'd never managed to scrub out. It had always been my Saturday apron. The others were too new, too stiff in the straps. I turned the spigot off. The hose jerked slightly, releasing a last half-hearted drizzle onto the bricks near my feet. I didn't check the hydrangeas. The kitchen window was open across the fence. Graham's voice carried lightly indistinct, but patterned in the way he always talked when he was being careful to sound casual. A laugh followed, sharp, feminine, probably Marla's. Another voice higher chimed in. Sadie. Someone dropped something with a clatter and called out, "It's fine, just a little cracked." They hadn't noticed me. Last month, they'd talked about repainting the house. Cooler tones, Marla had said less beige, more slate. I had nodded, not because I agreed, but because my nods had become the default currency of those conversations. I remembered when we first painted it, Walter and I, over 2 weekends. He'd insisted on doing the trim himself, even though his back had started to give out. I still had the old paint-stained flannel shirt he wore. It hung behind my door sleeves empty, but still shaped like him. Graham used to call it Dad's armor. One year he tried it on as a joke. The sleeves had swallowed his arms. He said, "Guess it doesn't fit the new generation." No one laughed. My hands were damp. I wiped them on the apron over the same stained spot. The mail hadn't come yet, though. I wasn't really waiting for anything. Most letters these days were reminders. Co-pays, due coupons. I never used messages from people I once invited to dinner who now wrote, "Hope you're well," without knowing what that meant. I had once kept a list of meals I made for Graham's birthdays. The margin had notes, "Too much garlic." Sadie liked this one. Marla didn't touch hers. That notebook was in the second drawer of the hallway cabinet, under a stack of warranty papers for appliances I no longer owned. I had not been invited. That was the message, though it came without fanfare, without confrontation. It was not an argument. It was a quiet rearranging of space I used to fill. The front door was open, just barely. I saw movement behind the glass. A flash of someone's sleeve, white and clean, not the kind worn by someone who planned to garden or clean the garage. Once, during a dinner at their place, Marla pulled me aside and whispered, "It's easier when things are streamlined." Her voice had the same quality as the note. Direct, clipped. Designed to leave no room for a follow-up. That evening, I brought over a pie dish I'd made for Sadie. No one commented on the pie. Graham had complimented the crust, but the kind of way one compliments a hotel robe. "It's fine. We just need things to feel less complicated," Marla had added during another conversation. She always used that word complicated when she meant present. I stood at the edge of my driveway longer than necessary, holding nothing, watching nothing. A pair of birds moved across the utility line, but I couldn't say what kind. My eyes weren't sharp like they used to be. Inside, the kettle had gone cold. I reheated it out of habit, poured water over the same tea bag I'd used the day before. The flavor was thinner, like a voice I could no longer make out. The note was still in my apron pocket. I unfolded it once, looking not for clarity, but for weight. It didn't feel heavier than before. I opened the drawer near the pantry, the one with rubber bands and warranty slips. Near the back was a small notebook with a stitched spine, pale gray with frayed edges. I used it to track small things, which plants bloomed when the last oil change was the number of light bulbs left in the closet. I wrote down the date. Beneath it, note from Marla. Please don't come this weekend. I didn't add commentary. I paused, pen still in hand, and considered writing one more line. Something that might account for the way my hands had hovered above the teacup this morning, unsure whether to pour. But I left the space blank. There were no footsteps behind me. No one called to explain. No phone lit up. No apology waited like a bruise. Only the note folded again, and now part of my own record. Later, I placed the notebook back where it belonged, beneath the stack of unused coupons and an expired gift card to a restaurant that had closed 2 years ago. I didn't mention it to anyone. I folded the apron neatly and left it on the chair by the window. The stain was still visible, faint, but loyal. Not everything that's removed from a house is thrown out. Some things are simply walked around unacknowledged until they learn to stand still. And so I did. Some people learn to disappear without ever leaving. I once changed the color of my blouse before a family photo because Marla said earth tones were easier on the eye. She had smiled when she said it, as though I might take offense if she'd phrased it any plainer. I'd already been wearing pale blue, but I changed into beige. I told myself it didn't matter what I wore, not really. I stood at the far left of the group, 1 foot just outside the edge of the carpet, hands tucked behind my back. No one ever sent me a copy of that picture. There was a time when I believed the absence of complaint meant something was going right. I started cooking meatless dinners for Thanksgiving after Marla said the smell of roasted poultry lingered on curtains for days. I remember lifting the foil on the lentil loaf that first year, steam rising like something being released. She took 1 bite, nodded once, and went back to her wine. Graham said nothing at all. Later, I found the rest of her portions scraped into the trash, neatly covered by a paper napkin. I moved into the smallest bedroom 2 winters ago. It had once been the sewing room with 1 narrow window and a door that stuck when it rained. I cleared the shelves myself, boxed up fabric I hadn't touched in years, and folded the cutting board flat under the bed. Marla stepped inside once and said, "It feels very simple." I never brought my books back out. Graham used to walk past the door without glancing in. One evening, I asked if the children needed more space for their studies. He looked puzzled. "We're fine. We just thought you might sleep better in a quieter part of the house." That same week, I gave him $5,000. He hadn't asked, not outright. He had mentioned something about credit cards and timing, how they'd miscalculated after the insurance premiums adjusted. I left the check on the hall table. It disappeared the next morning. No one brought it up again. Once, while I was folding towels in the laundry room, Graham leaned on the doorframe. "You know you always do everything right," he said. "That's not always easy for other people." I remember turning toward the dryer, pretending to check the lint trap. He didn't say it unkindly. That was the part that stayed with me. I used to think that love meant adjusting, taking up less space, speaking second, offering the last piece of cake. When I was young, my mother called it grace. When Walter was still alive, he called it strength. I don't know what to call it now. Sometimes I answered questions before they were asked. "Would you mind picking Sadie up?" Of course, I already had my coat on. Could I stay home from the lake trip this year, just so they could have more room? I'd already unpacked my suitcase. There was a scarf I used to wear, a gift from Graham when he was 12. Pale green with uneven stitching. I kept it long after the wool began to pill. One spring I found it folded in the guest linen drawer. I didn't remember putting it there. I ran my fingers along the frayed edge. When I asked Marla if she'd seen it, she said, Oh, that old thing, I thought it was a cleaning rag. I didn't take it back out. They once held a birthday lunch for Caleb. I arrived with a carrot cake. Marla met me at the door and said, "We're trying to cut down on sugar. You can leave it in the car if you want." So I did. During dinner, she handed out tiny glass bowls of sliced pears and almond slivers. Graham poured cider. Sadie showed me a school project that mentioned family traditions. I asked what she'd written. "Dad said we're still figuring that out," she replied. "He says you don't want to force things that don't fit anymore." I excused myself to the hallway. There was a painting there I hadn't noticed before. A watercolor of a coastline with no boats. I used to believe time made things more solid. That if you stayed long enough, you became part of the foundation. But sometimes you just learn which corners to avoid. There was a tablecloth I kept for special occasions. Off-white linen with small embroidered vines in the corners. I ironed it every year the night before Madeline's birthday. Last year, no one asked for it. I brought it out anyway, laid it across the table in the garage, and set out paper plates in stacks of 20. Marla handed me a note with the seating plan. "We've arranged for some of the older guests to sit inside. You'll have a nice view from the side garden." My name was written in pencil. Next to it, the word optional. I sat where they placed me. No one came to refill my lemonade. The tablecloth stayed folded in the storage bin after that. I didn't wash it. The faint trace of icing still marked one edge hardened into a thin line. I never told anyone about that afternoon. Not when Jeanette stopped by, not when the pharmacist asked if I had plans for the weekend. Not even when Sadie called 2 weeks later to say she forgot to thank me for the garden clippers. I had tried in the way quiet people do, by giving way, by staying soft at the edges, by never asking who decided I belonged less than I used to. That tablecloth is still in the bin. I know exactly where it is, and I haven't opened that bin again. I never understood how absence could take up so much space. There was a Christmas card one year, the kind with glossy print and smiling faces. It had been tucked neatly into my mailbox with the others. Local flyers, coupons. I never used a utility bill I could recite by heart. The envelope was red, cheerful, unnecessarily taped shut. On the back, in Marla's handwriting, the Ellingtons. Inside, a photo of them all in matching scarves standing in front of the fireplace I once scrubbed with vinegar and lemon peel. "Wishing you warmth and joy. Graham, Marla, Sadie, and Caleb." No mention of me, though. The return address was still this house. I held the card for a long time. My name wasn't missing because of space. They'd made space by leaving me out. At Sadie's graduation, I sat toward the back. The seat was sticky from the sun, but no one noticed. The program listed donors and volunteers, and under family guests, it read, "Grandparents, Charles and Edith, paternal Ruth E. Former." I ran my finger along the parentheses as if I could peel them away. When she walked across the stage, Sadie looked straight ahead, and I clapped with the rest of the crowd, though I couldn't hear my hands. There was a photo afterward. Someone asked me to step to the side so they could get just the kids and parents. Marla turned toward me, but didn't meet my eyes. "We'll send you the good ones." I nodded. Later that week, an email came with one photo attached. Cropped clean, no trace of my shoes at the edge, no corner of my jacket. The album I made for Graham's 40th sat untouched on the coffee table. I'd stitched the cover myself, navy thread on gray linen. Inside were Polaroids of his second-grade science fair, a photo of him eating peaches on a porch step, one of his father holding him in a striped towel. I added handwritten notes in the margins, soft pencil, careful print. When I brought it over, Marla opened the first page and paused. "These are charming, but the quality's a little dated. I'll scan them and make a digital copy something cleaner." She slid it under a stack of magazines. I never asked about it again. The tea towel I embroidered for Sadie, her name in lilac thread, surrounded by stitched violets, ended up in a box by the door labeled donation. I'd only seen it because I came by unexpectedly and Marla was reorganizing. "Oh, that old thing? I didn't think you'd want it back. I didn't touch it. Just looked at the way the thread had loosened near the corners, the way years make things seem less delicate, more disposable." Once I brought over a small framed photo to hang in the hallway. It was from a family trip to Mendocino, the last one Walter was healthy enough to walk the cliffs. Everyone had sunburns and wind-blown hair. Graham had wrapped his arm around my shoulder. Marla accepted it, turned it over. "We've got a color scheme going for the wall," she murmured. "I'll keep this with the other ones we're rotating. It never made it to the wall." When I cleared out the attic to give them more space, I found the wedding dress I wore in a pressed box. Ivory lace, slightly yellowed, still intact. The hem carried a faint mark of pine needles from our ceremony near the woods. I placed it carefully into a protective sleeve and gave it to Marla just in case Sadie ever wanted something old, something soft. "We're not really doing vintage," she said, "but thank you." The dress was never mentioned again. Even my own handwriting had started to look unfamiliar. A grocery list I'd left behind had been thrown out and rewritten in Marla's looped script, stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. Mine was more angular, less polished. Graham used to tease me about my capital G's, how they looked like treble clefs. Now I wrote notes only in pencil, folded them into cookbooks, tucked them behind spice jars. "Mom, you do a lot for people, but sometimes it's hard being around you. You make everything seem like it's been measured and judged." Graham had said that once at a brunch when Marla was scraping burnt egg off a pan. He wasn't looking at me when he said it, but I heard every syllable land in the silence. I hadn't measured anything. I only remembered things people said they'd forgotten. I'd never asked to be the center. I'd only tried to be close enough to see. But even in the photo albums I made, I had to look twice to find myself always to the edge, always with half a hand or the hem of a dress showing. The small metal box I kept in the bottom drawer now held the pieces. The invitation to Caleb's first piano recital, where my name had been handwritten on a post-it not printed like the others. A thank you card signed only by Marla, though the gift was meant for both. A napkin from the baby shower I helped plan, folded and still stained with cranberry punch. I closed the lid without locking it, but still placed it beneath sweaters I no longer wore. I took out the wedding photo last. Walter's eyes were squinting from the light. He was holding my hand as though he were anchoring me in. "You'll never be left out," he'd whispered just after the vows. I'd believed it. I'd believed in small promises that sounded permanent. I looked at the photo for a while, traced the crease forming at the edge where the album cover had pressed too long. I thought of the way vows are spoken aloud but disappear into memory, how they don't echo, only dissolve. I thought so too. I whispered, not to him, not to the photo, not really to anyone. And then I folded the photo back into its sleeve, smoothed the edges, and closed the album like someone turning off a light. I used to believe that certain things once established held, like the scent of lemon oil on old wood, or the way my name was etched into the spine of the family Bible, permanent, by practice, not decree. At the bank, the woman behind the glass had the kind of voice that made everything sound final. That account no longer exists. She didn't look up. Her nails tapped the keyboard one finger at a time. I gave her the number again slower. She didn't retype it. There was a transfer and full closure 3 weeks ago. I stood still. My hands had been inside my coat pockets, still holding the slip I'd signed in line. The slip now useless, like something from a different decade. She rotated her screen toward me. "Graham Ellington authorized the move as legal representative. It's part of an asset restructuring." I asked nothing. I nodded, stepped back from the counter, took the offered pamphlet about financial security, and walked out as if I'd come in for directions. I still had Douglas Wyatt's card. His name embossed corners, worn soft from years in my wallet. When Walter passed, Douglas had come to the house in his gray coat and darker expression. Walter trusted paper, he'd once told me, but paper's only as good as the person holding it. I called. He didn't remember me at first. I could hear him shuffling something, maybe his lunch. Give me a few hours to pull the file. When he called back, his tone shifted. He cleared his throat. You granted full authority to Graham in February. Durable power of attorney. Signed and notarized at their house. I was there, I said, though he hadn't asked. You initialed each page. It's a clean signature, Ruth, not coerced. I reviewed it myself. I remembered that day. Graham had come by with a stack of documents. Emergency paperwork, he said, just in case something happens. He'd laid them across the table next to the grocery list and an envelope from the vet. Nothing changes, he promised, smiling too widely. This just protects everyone, I signed. He hadn't rushed me. He hadn't watched me either. He poured coffee. The kind I never liked, burnt and flavored with hazelnut. I used a pen from the drawer with a faded company logo and blue ink that smudged near the edges. I hadn't read anything past the headers. The word protection was printed twice, and I took that to mean safety. I didn't expect erasure. At home, I pulled the file drawer open. The metal stuck slightly, as it always had. I removed the binder labeled Walter, 1984 savings. Tabs still intact. Handwriting in black pen. His old notes in the margins, arrows, exclamations, a doodle of a house. The last entry was mine, a small withdrawal for the Quilt Club fundraiser. I sat at the kitchen table and reread the power of attorney line by line. I hadn't noticed before how my signature tilted slightly downward. I held the paper close to my face. The date in the corner was written in digital type. Cold and uniform. No coffee stains, no fingerprints. Just quiet legality. Mom, you trust too easily, Graham once said when I gave the roofer the full check before he'd finished the gutters. You assume people mean well. He hadn't been smiling then. That same week, he brought over a housewarming gift for a neighbor using my name on the card. She knows you, he explained. It'll mean more coming from you. I'd let him. I'd signed the card. Now I looked at the envelope the bank had printed with the transaction summary. Everything was renamed. The savings account had been absorbed into something titled Ellington Family Holdings. I didn't recall ever agreeing to become a holding. In the living room, the clock chimed 7. I hadn't wound it, but it kept time by habit like I did. I opened the drawer where I kept bills and letters, removed the older statements, placed the new documents underneath. I didn't shred anything. I didn't mark anything void. I just made room. I walked down the hallway past the framed needlepoints, the thermostat I'd once argued with Walter about the coat rack that now held nothing but Graham's forgotten blazer. The wood beneath my feet had softened over the years, but it still remembered where I used to stand to reach the high shelf. I passed that spot without stopping. At the end of the hall, where my name used to be etched in a small brass plate on the mailbox, there was now a new plaque, polished, clean. The home of Graham and Marla Ellington. No mention of lineage. No need. There had once been a sticker beneath it with Sadie's handwriting. Grandma's house slightly crooked, peeling at the edge. I'd left it there on purpose. It had disappeared sometime between seasons. No one said anything. No one needed to. My ring caught on the corner of the plaque as I reached out to steady myself. A thin scratch appeared in the metal, barely visible. I didn't rub it out. I stepped back. There was no announcement, no confrontation. just a slow and silent recognition I no longer lived in any place that bore my name. And still I stood there letting that realization settle into my bones, not like ice, but like dust, soft and inevitable. I stopped needing explanations once I understood silence could speak with more precision than any apology ever could. I told Graham I'd be leaving. I didn't bring up the closed bank account or the proxy forms. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't even ask if they would miss me. I said I think it's time I stayed somewhere quieter. His shoulders didn't move. Marla offered a soft, symmetrical smile, the kind people give at funerals when they don't know the deceased. If that's what you think is best, then we'll respect it. No one asked when. No one offered help. The next morning, I started folding clothes quietly, slowly, as if unthreading a life stitch by stitch. The worn cardigan with the pulled sleeve, the apron with faint tomato stains, a jar of buttons that had outlived the clothes they came from. I wrapped each in newspaper. Not because they were fragile, but because the act made my hands busy, and busy hands ask for nothing. The china stayed behind. So did the ring dish Walter gave me one winter, etched in his own hesitant scrawl with a penknife he bought secondhand. The quilt I'd mended too many times to pretend it was accidental anymore. It rested on the bed Graham had as a boy. His feet always stuck out the bottom until he left for college and never came back for good. I taped 3 boxes closed, labeled none of them. Just took the clock from above the stove, bought in '69 when I still used coupons for meat, and kept a strict envelope system for bills. Its hands had lost their fight with accuracy, but the ticking still gave rhythm to a room. Marla didn't come downstairs until mid-afternoon. She was holding a tablet in one hand and a cup in the other. "Oh," she said, "you're still here." I nodded. My hand was already in the drawer where I kept Walter's handkerchief. She hovered a moment. "I'll let Graham know you're making progress." She didn't ask where I'd be going. Later, as I carried a small box through the hallway, I caught Sadie sitting at the bottom step, knees tucked under her chin. Her eyes flicked toward me, then down. One hand gripped the banister like it might tip away from her. "Mama says you just need a break," she murmured. I didn't answer. I adjusted the weight of the box in my arms. "She says not to cry over things that aren't broken." I placed the box on the bench near the door. When I turned back, she was gone. I took only one photograph, an old one, where Walter had lifted Graham high enough that the boy's feet pointed outward like a diver mid-air. I was laughing in the background, almost out of frame. The photo had creases, and my face was smudged from time, but it stayed. The rest I left. By the end of the second day, my hands ached, not from weight, but from holding everything too gently. No one offered to carry a bag. No one asked if I'd found a place. I took the bus. 3 transfers, 2 stairs too steep. One stranger asked if I needed help lifting the box, and I declined. The apartment was small. It had a thin smell of something floral, something old like lilac dust left behind on a shelf. The heater made a knocking sound every few hours, steady as breath. The windows groaned when I opened them, as if surprised someone still cared about air. I unpacked without ceremony. I placed the photograph on the sill, tilted it toward the light. I unfolded Walter's handkerchief and laid it over the nightstand, then tucked the tin of mints beside it. I never liked the flavor too sharp, but he used to carry them for when my voice cracked. The microwave reflected my face faintly. My cheeks were narrower than I remembered. The space between my eyebrows had deepened. I didn't adjust anything, I just looked. That evening I made tea. The kettle I brought was dented, the handle slightly loose. The cup had a crack along the rim, like a hairline on bone barely visible unless light passed through it. I drank slowly. The steam fogged the nearby window. There was nothing outside but a narrow alley and the brick of another building. I stayed at the table long after the tea had gone cool. No one called. I had left a note on the refrigerator, yellow paper, torn edge. "I've gone. Don't worry, I'm fine." The magnet holding it up was shaped like a ladybug. Sadie had made it in second grade with too much glue and not enough symmetry. I didn't tell them where I'd gone. I didn't call the church to update my address. Dorothy might notice eventually. She always did the sign-in sheet for potlucks. The mailbox stayed mostly empty. Flyers, a pharmacy discount. No envelopes in familiar handwriting, no invitations, no apologies. That was fine. I didn't want apologies. I wanted a room that didn't speak back to me. I wanted my own steps to echo without judgment. I wanted to pour tea without anyone asking who else wanted a cup. In a drawer near the sink, I placed a folded receipt from the moving company. Not because it meant anything, but because it was the first thing in a while I had signed that led to no argument. The clock ticked above the stove slightly uneven. I didn't straighten it. I sat on the couch that came with the apartment. The cushions were too stiff. The fabric made a sound when I moved. I stayed still. My hands rested palm down on my lap. There was a small stain on my skirt from where the tea had spilled. I didn't change. I didn't need a mirror to know I had left the room behind in me. But I had. And they would not notice. That too was fine. Not everything we leave behind has to be taken from us. Some things we place down gently, and we don't look back. Sometimes the quiet feels heavier than noise ever did. I brewed tea that first morning with the old white kettle Walter had once tightened the handle on. It hummed a little too long before whistling. I didn't rush it. There was no one to interrupt, no one tapping a spoon or glancing toward the clock. I folded a towel along the bathroom sink and pressed the creases straight with the edge of my hand, more out of habit than need. The walls here don't echo like the old house. That house had hallways that carried sound footsteps, drawers opening the soft argument of two people trying to disagree politely. Here, sound stays where it begins. A cabinet closes and disappears. The floor holds your step instead of answering it. I used to keep a small notebook by the microwave meant for grocery lists. Now it sits beside the lamp. I write one line in the mornings, sometimes two. The entries aren't about the weather or what I've eaten, just fragments. Walter would have brought a wrench. Or, that lavender took to clay soil faster than expected. No one reads it but me. That feels right. I carried the lavender pot to the sill and angled it toward the faintest slice of sun. The windows face the lawn, which is trimmed too often to grow wild. It's the sort of view you get when people expect you not to be watching closely. The first knock came 3 days in. I hadn't spoken since signing the lease. She wore a fleece jacket zipped all the way to her throat and held a glass dish covered with foil. Her voice didn't try too hard. "Jeanette Hobbs? From down the hall. You looked new." I nodded. That was enough. She held out the dish. Apple crumble. Store-bought crust, but I tried. I took it without comment. We both knew that was more than nothing. Later, I rinsed the plate and walked it back to her door. I left it on the mat, clean, no note. She opened her door anyway. "Don't be a stranger," she said. I didn't promise anything. She didn't ask me to. In the afternoons, I walk the perimeter of the complex. The buildings are low brick, faded to soft rust. Everyone walks slowly here, not because of age, but because there's nowhere urgent to be. I pass the same woman every day who waters her roses with a mug instead of a can. We nod, but we've never spoken. Once, I heard a child's voice from one of the upper windows, laughing, sharp and alive. I didn't look up. I folded my arms and waited for it to stop. There's a chipped saucer I use now, blue around the edge with a crack, like a branch reaching out from the center. I keep my keys in it. Just keys and one button from a cardigan I don't own anymore. At night, I sit with a book I've read before. Not for the story, but for the sound of pages. I stopped watching television when I moved in. It spoke too loudly for a place so quiet. The building's heating system clicks before it starts. That sound has become familiar, like someone clearing their throat before speaking, but deciding not to. One morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside a flyer from Graham's new financial firm. Let us help you prepare for the future. I held it over the sink and let the faucet run. The paper curled slowly under the water ink, bleeding like it had something to confess. Later that week, the apartment office slipped a note under my door. Family member asked to confirm residence for legal purposes. Please advise. I tore it into even pieces and dropped them into the trash, layering tea leaves on top. No reply was still a reply. I bought a new set of curtains. Beige, with a faint leaf pattern. They don't quite reach the floor. That imperfection felt honest, so I didn't return them. The lavender has begun to lean toward the window. I rotated the pot gently, giving it space. Walter would have chuckled at how seriously I take its position. Once, I caught my reflection in the oven door. Not the face I remembered. I leaned in, then stepped away. The oven clock blinked 12 hurry. I left it. Jeanette passed me on the stairs and mentioned a bingo night, if you ever want to laugh. I smiled without showing teeth. She didn't wait for an answer. In the drawer by the sink, there's a packet of sugar labeled "For Guests," still unopened. I sorted the mail, slipping each piece into a drawer by date. Nothing personal came. Just envelopes with windows printed names in bold. I wrote "Return to sender" on one and placed it gently back in the outgoing tray. Sometimes, I whisper Walter's name before bed, not to call him, just to keep it in the air. I haven't rearranged the furniture. The bed stays against the far wall, the table near the kitchen. I like that nothing surprises me when I turn around. The towel I brought from the house still has a faint bleach mark near the edge. I fold it carefully after each wash, lining the faded part inward so it doesn't show. There's a woman on the floor above who hums while watering her plants. I know it's her because the sound stops the second her window closes. The melody is always the same, something half remembered. I wait for it now, as steady as the kettle's whistle. No one here asks me what happened. No one tells me what I should have done. That is a kind of grace I wasn't expecting. I keep the spare key taped to the underside of the dresser drawer. Not because I plan to use it, but because I still believe in the idea of keeping something just in case. I haven't worn my wedding ring since I arrived. It rests in a velvet box beside the sugar packets. I open it some evenings, look at it, then close it again. There's a woman on television I used to admire, always calm, always knowing what to say. She once told a guest, "Some things leave and you realize you don't need them to stay whole." I wrote it down, folded it small, taped it inside the cupboard door. It's still there. I never liked when people began with "just a small favor." It started with a text from Graham. Nothing warm, just a string of words clipped at the edges. "Mom, I need you to sign a verification form for the old house, just to confirm the name for the refinance. No punctuation at the end, as if that somehow made it more casual, less of a demand. I read it twice, then once more before setting the phone down beside my tea. The cup left a faint ring on the table. I didn't wipe it away. There was something honest about marks that stayed. That afternoon, a voice I hadn't heard since I left rang out across the speaker, Marla. "It's really nothing, Ruth. Just a signature so the lawyers can move forward. Technically, you're still on record as a partial owner, and we'd like to clear it up. Nothing complicated, you understand." I let the silence settle between us. Then I said, "I'll need to see the document. My attorney will review it." Another pause. Then a click. She didn't even try to pretend she'd say thank you. The next message came sooner than I expected. This time, Graham's voice sharp, like a door slammed one room too far. Why involve a lawyer? Seriously, Mom. It's a standard form. You're making it harder than it has to be. I turned the page of the notebook in my lap. A list of things I needed to buy. Dish soap replacement, light bulbs, lavender oil. The sound of his voice didn't match the list. I let it fade. They didn't mention anything about how I'd been. No one asked if the studio was comfortable, if I had enough heat, if the medication still made my hands tremble by evening. Later, I opened Sadie's social media page. I hadn't looked in weeks. The last photo showed a birthday cake and 3 wine glasses. The caption underneath it was sharper than it looked. Nothing worse than fake family pretending it's all okay. Funny how money makes people suddenly miss you. She didn't tag anyone, but she didn't have to. The local church bulletin arrived folded in half the next morning. On the back, a section for community spotlights. Beneath a group photo was a short caption, "Thank you to the Ellingtons for hosting this year's garden tea." My name wasn't mentioned, not even in the acknowledgement line. A few members had called recently, their tone heavy with curiosity that they tried to lace in concern. "Are you ill? We just haven't seen you at service. I hope everything's all right with the family." I didn't correct them. That same week, Jeanette knocked on my door. She brought a dish of lemon bars that tasted like something from another time. As she set the plate down, she glanced at the stack of mail I hadn't sorted. "They want something from you," she said without preamble. "That's why they're calling now." I offered her tea. She refused gently, then leaned against the counter and looked straight ahead. "You left Ruth. They didn't come after you. Not for a word. Not for an apology. But now they need your name on something and suddenly you're important again." The box of legal papers arrived that Friday, sealed in thick white envelopes. One of them bore a yellow sticky note with Graham's handwriting, "Mom, just your signature at the bottom line." Nothing else. Inside, paragraph after paragraph of restructuring language. Words that blurred like watered ink. But I found my name printed formally, still attached to a trust I no longer believed in. Still anchoring something they wanted to dissolve without me. I reached for the paperclip from the drawer. Folded the documents, aligned the corners, slid the clip across carefully. Then I wrote one sentence on a square of plain stationery and placed it on top. I am no longer a guardian of this family's legacy. No signature. Just that. The next time the church bulletin came, I tore out the announcement section and left the rest. I folded the square neatly, slid it into the drawer beside the stove, and replaced it with a card I hadn't touched in years, Walter's retirement letter, the kind they used to read aloud and frame. It had a crease down the middle now. That made it easier to tuck away. I walked across the small room and opened the window halfway. The lavender plant leaned toward the light. Its leaves brushed the pane with no sound. There were no more texts from Graham after that. No missed calls. Just one email from Marla marked important in red unread to this day. Jeanette brought me a knitted scarf the next Sunday. Blue-gray, the kind that didn't match anything, but felt like it did. She didn't ask how things were. She just set it down and said, "Thought you could use something soft." I didn't tell her I'd slept better that week than I had in years. Later that night, I placed the unopened envelope from Marla into the same box where I kept Walter's cufflinks and the last Christmas card that still said Mom instead of Ruth. The card had glitter along the edge that never stayed where it was supposed to. My hands shimmered faintly for a moment after touching it. I wiped them on my lap. Then I turned off the overhead light, leaving only the lamp beside me. I took out a worn envelope addressed in my own hand, one I never sent. It wasn't anger that kept it from the mailbox. It was the certainty that silence sometimes holds more shape than any sentence. I folded it again without opening it. Some names once spoken don't echo back. They fall gently into a kind of hush that even memory doesn't disturb. I never thought silence could sound so full. The bell above the bookstore door gave a short, dull chime when I first stepped in. Bryce Kellerman wore a vest with threadbare shoulders and a pen clipped to his collar. He didn't ask many questions, just pointed at the pile of unboxed hardcovers by the counter and nodded toward the empty shelves near the window. I began with a stack of gardening books, titles about soil heirloom seeds, rain-fed tomatoes. My hands moved slower than they once did, but the rhythm of arranging things felt familiar, almost like kneading dough. There was a comfort in putting things where they belonged without anyone coming behind to shift them or sigh audibly. Bryce gave me a key to the cabinet behind the register. I tucked it into the small inside pocket of my handbag, where my last house key used to be. One morning, Maxine Carr stopped me outside the senior center with a laminated card and a ribboned envelope. "We've made you an honorary member," she said, pressing it into my palm. No dues, no form to fill. The card was heavier than I expected. Not expensive, just firm. The kind of paper that didn't bend when held between two fingers. I slipped it into my wallet behind the faded photograph of Walter on our trip to Maine. For the first time in years, something with my name on it didn't require permission. On the way home, I passed a display window with a wool coat in soft teal. I walked past it the first day, then circled back the second. I didn't ask anyone whether it was too bright or too expensive. I didn't calculate how it would look in photos or who might raise an eyebrow. I tried it on in the store bathroom. The lining made a soft rustle as I moved, like a whisper meant only for me. I wore it out of the shop tag, snipped by a clerk who didn't ask whom it was for. That same week, I told the hairdresser, just above the shoulder, something that doesn't need a mirror every morning. She didn't talk much, which suited me. The strands on the floor were silver and soft, like early frost. I didn't save them. I bought a small pot of rosemary on the walk home and set it just outside my window. Walter used to say it kept the mosquitoes away. I liked that it kept coming back even when trimmed. I watered it at dawn. Then one Tuesday, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in weeks. "Sadie, I miss you. Mom said you're too tired to see people." I let the message sit unopened for 10 minutes. Then I replied, "I'm well. If you ever truly want to come, the door's not locked." I didn't wait for dots to appear beneath my message. I didn't check again that evening. That night, I took down the old framed pictures from the shelf. I didn't throw them away. I didn't cry over them. I laid each one flat, wiped the glass, and slipped them into a cedar box that had once held linens. I labeled the box in pencil, "Not urgent, open later." The next morning, I didn't start the kettle first. I opened the journal I kept by the bed and wrote, "What will I live for today?" I didn't address it to Walter this time. I didn't write as though I owed anyone an explanation. That same afternoon, Bryce left a note beside the cash register. "Ruth, would you mind wrapping the birthday orders? You do it better than I do." He'd written it in blue pen. The handwriting sloped slightly to the left. I folded the note in half and tucked it under my watch strap while I worked. Jeanette knocked later that evening with a mason jar of honey and 3 oranges. She placed them on the counter and said, "You're looking more like yourself lately." I didn't correct her. I wasn't sure what myself meant anymore. But it wasn't the same woman who'd once folded under whispers. In the community newsletter, I saw an announcement, "Spring Choir, accepting new voices." No experience needed. I didn't sign up, but I didn't discard the paper either. I tore the corner out and placed it inside the book I was reading. That weekend, a man at the bookstore asked whether I could recommend something for his wife. He said, "She's starting again. Wants something quiet, but not too soft." I handed him a novel I hadn't read in years but remembered liking. He turned it over, nodded, and said, "You seem like someone who's been through things." He didn't say what things. I wrapped his book in brown paper and tied it with a string. As he left, he glanced at the rosemary by the window and said, "That plant's doing well." "It knows where it is," I said. That night I folded my new coat over the chair, brewed a cup of chamomile, and opened my journal again. The sentence I wrote was short. I didn't disappear. I just stopped waiting to be found. I left the book open on the table. The rosemary stirred in the window breeze, and somewhere in the hallway, someone was laughing at a television too loud. I didn't mind. I used to think names were just labels until I changed mine. At the lawyer's office, I slid a stack of papers across the table without a sound. Each page had been prepared weeks before, printed on matte cream stock with no letterhead. I had avoided anything glossy. Gloss reflects too much. I handed over the signed letter declining legal guardianship of Graham and Marla, a formal request to remove my name from all remaining contracts. A notarized notice of address change. At the bottom of the last page was a single line typed in bold, "Name change, filed, Ruth Halden." No one in that room asked why. The paralegal skimmed, nodded, clipped the sheets together with a smooth click, and passed them along. No questions, no smiles. When I stepped back out into the corridor, I touched the side of my bag where I had folded the envelope containing my old driver's license. The name Ellington still sat there, embossed in raised silver letters. It didn't sting. It just didn't belong. The envelope stayed sealed. 3 days later, an envelope arrived without a return address. Inside, a handwritten note from Graham. "You didn't need to do this. This is beyond cruel. You're hurting people just to make a point." No greeting, no signature, just that. I sat with the letter resting on the countertop beside a half-peeled orange. The knife I'd used to score the rind had left a wet mark on the cutting board that slowly bled out in a shape like a boot heel. I stared at that shape longer than I looked at his handwriting. I didn't respond. I scanned the name change document and attached it to a reply email titled, "Legal Confirmation Only." No message, just the attachment. Then I closed the laptop and poured myself a glass of water. Jeanette dropped by with a flyer folded in half. "My granddaughter's wedding. We'd love to have you," she tapped the corner of the paper. "Row 1's reserved for family. You qualify." The way she said it flat, like it wasn't up for discussion, made me think of my father's voice on Sunday mornings, calling out to my mother about coffee grounds being too coarse. There was never blame in his voice, just fact. I pinned the wedding flyer under a ceramic magnet shaped like a pear. It was chipped at the bottom, the paint worn off near the stem. Walter bought it at a church fair the year we replaced our second fridge. I hadn't thought about that day until I touched the chipped edge. Later that week, I boxed up the last of the papers: deeds, utility bills, old tax returns, a church newsletter from 1997 with my name printed beneath Hospitality Committee. I didn't sort by year or relevance. I just stacked everything, taped the edges shut, and wrote on the lid with a black Sharpie personal archive. No verification required. The handwriting looked steady. I didn't rewrite it. I found the photograph from our 25th anniversary inside a manila folder. Walter in his navy blazer, Graham in a red clip-on tie, and me in the dress with pearl buttons I had altered by hand. We were smiling in the photo, but only Walter's hand was on my shoulder. Graham's arms were crossed. Even then, I placed the photo face down on the bottom of the box. Marla had once remarked, "Your generation just clings to paper like it's proof you mattered." I hadn't responded then. I don't remember if I even looked up. The filing of the name change had taken less time than I expected. The woman behind the glass had asked for identification and payment, then typed in silence. Any particular reason for the reversion? Her voice had a rhythm like a rain chain, steady, dull, not invasive. No, I said. That no stretched in my mind long after I left. No explanation, no apology. Just the shape of clarity that doesn't require words. I walked home with the new ID in my coat pocket. It felt lighter than the old one, though it weighed the same. That night I folded the nightgown Walter gave me after my hysterectomy. Pale pink lace trim, slightly frayed. I placed it on the top shelf of my closet, next to the cedar box labeled Letters, Keep. I didn't open the box. I didn't need to. A voicemail came through at dusk, Graham again. I guess this means you're officially done with us. Fine. Just remember who kept your name alive all these years. There was a pause before he hung up, like he was waiting for the sound of my breath. I didn't call back. Instead, I clipped the voicemail transcript and placed it behind the new deed of my studio apartment. Not as proof, just placement. I sat with Jeanette the following morning over coffee. She poured without asking. Cutting ties doesn't mean erasing people, she said. It means they don't get to keep pulling you backward. I noticed her left earring was missing. A tiny sapphire normally on her lobe now gone. She didn't mention it. I didn't ask. I touched the ring I still wore on my right hand. Not my wedding ring. The one my mother gave me on my 18th birthday, a single white opal set in silver. She told me once it was meant to remind me who I was before anyone told me otherwise. The stone looked dull under the kitchen light, but it still fit. I didn't send invitations to my new address. No announcements. No moving on declarations. Instead, I signed my new name on a bank document, handed over my expired license, and tucked the new card into a fabric wallet that had belonged to my sister. The edges were frayed. One side was stitched with the initials HRH. I'd kept it hidden for years. Now it was all I used. I didn't think about whether they'd notice I'd disappeared from their records, whether my absence would register at all. I only thought about how quiet my name looked in black ink. Not bold, not etched. Just present. Ruth Halden. That was enough. I placed the sealed archive box on the lowest shelf in my closet beneath the folded quilt Walter's mother had sewn the year we married. The edges were worn. One corner had thinned almost to transparency. I touched that spot gently and let my hand stay there. Then I closed the closet door. Sometimes I think peace isn't a place, but a sound. The click of a drawer closing, the hush of water poured from just the right height, the soft brush of a sleeve against a wooden chair. The peppermint tea steeped slowly. I didn't rush it. The cup I used still had a pale mark near the base where glaze had thinned. It wasn't chipped, just imperfect in a way I recognized. I turned it once before lifting it, letting the steam rise into the lavender and rosemary air. From the cabinet beneath the bookshelf, I took out a bundle of old letters folded and paper-clipped in uneven stacks. Some had ink that bled slightly from humidity. Others bore faint pencil notations. None had stamps. One envelope not sealed had my writing to Sadie. The date in the corner was from early spring. I didn't reread the whole thing. Just the first line was enough. I hope you grow up in a home where words mean what they say. If one day you want to know who I was, come for love, not duty. The paper wasn't torn or worn, just quiet. I placed it back among the others. No ceremony, no weight. The floorboards gave a familiar sound when I stepped toward the window. Not a creak, more like a memory. The kind you don't need to share out loud. The phone blinked once. A message from Jeanette. Pear tart at noon. You in? I tapped back slowly, bringing a book. Reading Thoreau again. No emoji, no punctuation. She'd understand. A photo frame on the shelf caught the light. Newer than most things I owned. Jeanette and I seated in the bookshop, each of us holding a novel. My scarf had been tucked into my coat that day, not because it was cold, but because I finally liked the way I looked without arranging myself for someone else. I hadn't replaced the old family photos. I hadn't stored them either, just boxed them labeled in my own handwriting, not urgent, not erased. They didn't make me flinch anymore. I didn't need a wall to tell a story I no longer lived in. The rug had a small pull near the corner where a thread had come loose. I hadn't trimmed it. I let it curl back in on itself like it wanted to. The tea had cooled, and I still drank it. On the table, a coaster I made from fabric scraps caught a ring of moisture. I didn't wipe it. Some marks belonged. The day moved gently. I didn't track the hours. No clock ticked to measure who I was becoming. The drawer where I kept my documents no longer carried anyone else's name beside mine. No co-signatures. No emergency contacts filed under my role as someone's wife or mother. Once I would have hesitated. I would have thought, what if they need something? What if they come around? But when the envelope came from Graham scrawled in rushed cursive, "You've gone too far. You hurt people just to prove a point." I didn't answer. I scanned the name change certificate and sent it in silence. No apology, no rebuttal, just the shape of a line drawn clearly. The rosemary plant on the windowsill had grown sideways, bending toward the morning sun. I hadn't turned the pot. I liked its insistence. The lid of the tea tin clicked softly when I closed it. That sound stayed with me longer than most conversations used to. Sometimes silence feels like a choice. Other times it's the only honest thing left. Outside, a single leaf broke loose and fell onto the sill. No flourish, no wind to carry it far. I watched it land and settle. Then I breathed and let it be. I don't need them to understand. I don't need anyone to witness this. I just need to wake up each morning knowing I live without asking permission.